Everyone. This morning we had an interesting tour through France, Italy, Portugal, Slovenia, the UK. Giovanna sends her thanks and regards from Napoli. And we heard some interesting, very different perspectives on emergency law in various categories of emergency law. And in this afternoon, we want to focus on Israel. And the occasion, basically, of this gathering is a draft bill that was publicized very recently, called Preparedness of the Home Front for the State of Emergency. This is the first comprehensive bill which actually sets various measures, various competences, various powers and institutions to deal with generically emergency. And we want to talk a little bit about this bill and get some of your very wise remarks from around the world. We will start with a presentation of Batya and Eran that will portray the main issues dealt with in the bill in comparative perspective, and this is based on research that we commissioned them to do. And we will continue with Mayor Eran, who will talk about constitutionalization of emergency powers. And then we'll have a presentation of the main features of the bill by one of its drafters. And then we'll open up for a general discussion. Okay? So, Batya, Eran, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. So, here we are in 2017, and we actually don't have a law in Israel, one comprehensive law that regulates the management of emergency situations. I must say, in the morning, I see most everybody was talking about emergency in the sense of terrorism and mass migration, etc. And actually, the focus on the bill of the Israeli law is on disasters. In order to understand, I'd like to just give a brief introduction of brief history of the Israel legislation in order to understand where we are today. Israel got independence in 1948. The first Prime Minister was David Ben-Gurion, and he actually, as it says here, this is one of his quotes, it's famous, he saw the whole country as a front line, the whole people are in the army. And this is actually what guided him in 1951 when the first civil defense law was formed in Israel. The first civil defense law actually said that there's an officer who is like the CEO, but it didn't say that it is part of the army. They integrated in the law, there were volunteers, volunteer groups, there were people, citizens that had to, in time of it, actually they were talking about time of war, they have to come and help out on the, to help whatever is going on. But this was the general meeting. What happened was, though, that the civil defense became a part of the army, and the final stamp was after the first Gulf War in 1991. And the Home Front Command was established in 1992 following the war. And it was following, as we can see, it became a major, we saw a shift from the border front to the home front, there was a change in the whole concept of the civil defense. Before we know the traditional wars were on borders with the tanks and whatever it is. Now we had missiles being shot at the civilian population, which we still see now from Gaza, as even last week, as we know, 16 rockets were shot into Israel. And so this made actually a different concept. And so the Home Front Command was established in the army itself. The head of the Home Front Command is a general. And the law was changed, the civil law. And in the civil defense law, not just the head of the civil defense got certain authorities, but also other, like the chief of staff and other high officers and the Minister of Defense. So now we already see a shift, and it became a part of the army, which as I say that there's a bit of a dilemma in Israel, because on one hand you have the army was very efficient, but on the other hand you have the soldiers who are have direct contact with the civilian population, and then giving them orders, and they actually come into to the municipalities, and they kind of forget that they're part of the army. They think that they can rule the country during these times of crisis. So this went on, and then the next change actually was the Second Lebanon War in 2006. And as it says, you can see here about 4,000 missiles were launched into Israel, to Hadera, which is south of Haifa. And there were 49 civilian fatalities and many wounded. And following this, the state controllers said that they recognized that there was a problem, that there was no one authority that manages disaster situations. And they recommended a national body be made. And this was actually in 2007, following the Second Lebanon War. The National Emergency Management Authority was established, NEMA, and it was done through a government situation. And we're 10 years later, and there still is no, the government decision, there still is no law governing this, the NEMA. So there have been several attempts to make a law, but up until now, it hasn't been successful. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to actually do a comparative study of what happens in different countries around the world and see how legislation in different countries deals with disaster management. And you can see that basically, again, we're coming to at the beginning of the day, we're talking about, the before, during, after, but actually I think this is what we had meant, because you have the preparedness and the mitigation stage, and then you have the response if the disaster actually happens, and then you have the recovery stage, which also includes the rehabilitation. So here are just some examples. Obviously, we aren't going to bring you the whole study. We haven't finished the whole study, but just to get an idea of different attitudes, different models that we see in legislation around the world. So if we look at the three different stages, we can ask which legislation, which laws, in which countries did they actually refer to all the stages in the main law. So in Israel, you all have a copy of the bill there. If you notice, actually, it talks about the stage 1, and it talks about the stage 2, but actually stage 3, the recovery stage, there's really nothing discussed in the law itself. In Japan, the Japan law is the Disaster Countermeasures Basic Act from 1997. It's a very detailed law, and it has all the stages. Then in Canada, well, it's a different system there. You have the national, and then you have the provinces. So we actually looked at the national level. You have a Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness in stage 1, but it doesn't actually go into any detail beyond that. But once we took, for instance, there's the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act from 1990, and it actually goes into stage 1 and stage 2. Then we looked at the Philippines. There's a Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act. It's a very, at least on the paper, I don't know what happens, per se, but it's it looks like a very good law. It's from 2010, and it has all 3 stages. Then we looked to see, you have different central authorities that were established in these laws. We wanted to see actually which minister is in charge of the central authority. So in Israel, as you can guess, it's the Ministry of Defense, and there was an attempt to make a separate office at one point. I think that you'll also discuss this, other people discuss it, and it lasted, I think, for about a year, and then it came back to the Ministry of Defense. I won't go into all of the reasons behind it. Maybe, I think, other speakers will talk about this. In Japan, it's the chairman of the council, the Central Disaster Prevention Council. It's actually the prime minister. You also see that in India. India, it's, I think, if I would give grades, I'd say India is one of the best laws. Is made. I don't actually know how it's done, even if you can see here. If in Japan they talk about the chairman of the council, in India even they said the chairperson. It's a very advanced law. In New Zealand, it actually was interesting because they left it open. It said just a minister appointed by the prime minister, and actually de facto they made a Ministry of Civil Defense in the emergency. In the UK, you have the Civil Contingencies Committee, and he's under the Home Secretary. And then you have in the Philippines, again, you have the Secretary of the Department of National Defense. So what we wanted to show you was just different models in different countries of which ministries are in charge of the central authority.
Sorry, just one question. Could you please explain a little bit more, because I'm not sure if I got it right. What do you mean by is in charge of?
In the law, if you have a law, okay, you have the law, and so the law says, for instance, even in Israel, if you look at what it says here, you have the National Emergency Management Authority, and it's in the office. It's in the office of the Minister of Defense, and he gives the, basically has the ministerial. Authority over
sort of an institutional affiliation of the subject.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. For instance, I mean, just to put it in the easiest way, now you have NEMA. You have also, we have Mayan, who is the legal advisor to the NEMA, and actually she's she works for the Ministry of Defense.
Verify that we mentioned the central authority because that's the main key for dealing with all the 3 stages.
Okay, and then the next thing that we wanted to actually compare in the different laws of different countries is how, again, if they relate to different elements during the 3 stages. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing here because I think we're kind of short in time. But as you can see, the first stage, as we said, is the preparedness and mitigation. And if you compare, you can see that all of them, all of the laws that we looked at had a requirement to make an emergency plan, a national plan. All of them spoke about a national plan. Some of them didn't go down and have in detail in the plan all of the different entities that are part of it. For instance, if you look about with the NGOs, in most of the countries, the national plan doesn't talk about the NGOs or volunteer groups, but we did see it in India and the Philippines, that they actually say to have them be involved in the preparedness and mitigation at the first level, at the level of preparedness. We looked also, we want to go and see whether there's a central budget. We didn't see anything in the UK actually about the budget. At the stage 2 response, the first thing that we wanted to actually see is whether the law said there has to be a declaration of an emergency situation in order to authorize the different responders to, start getting into action. And so we did see that, well, in Israel, Japan, Philippines, and Ontario, there has to be emergency declaration. In India, it doesn't say that there is actually a declaration. What was interesting that sometimes you see that it doesn't actually say that there's a declaration of an emergency, but it'll say things like a local government or a town council or whoever, they see that there is a situation of an emergency, and then they contact, usually if it's at the lower level, the local and the municipal level, they have to contact the central government or the province, whatever it is, and to get them involved.
One other question. That means just that I can understand it. When, for example, here in Haifa, there are binary words that would require the central government to declare an emergency.
Yes, and that's actually what I didn't say before in my introduction is that there's actually a separate law in Israel, the police ordinance. The police ordinance says that the government can, actually it's not the government first, it's either the Minister of Internal Security, Homeland Security, the head of the police, above the police, he can declare that there is a state of a major disaster. So that's what he would do. It would be at the central level. It would never be done at the level of the city. And if it has to do with a disaster that is actually has to do with something, in an army facility, would be by the Minister of Defense. And was actually interesting just to see that many of them talk about the power of the central authority to take over during an emergency. There's laws, for instance, if I'm not mistaken, it was in Japan, and it says that during an emergency, the central government can actually run a town instead of the mayor itself. They actually go in and they take over, they, run the municipality at a lower level. We also looked to see whether these laws talked about emergency regulations, and we could see that they do. Also in Israel, because we do have laws, wouldn't be right to say we don't have a law, because we have many laws, and we have other laws that give the different authorities the power to use emergency regulations, but even though we don't have that law, we have other laws that certainly empower them. We asked about using private resources, and Israel doesn't say anything about using private resources, and in Ontario and the other countries it does. Again, the question of NGOs, we don't have anything during the response stage of NGOs in Israel or in Ontario. You see it in other countries, Japan, Philippines, yeah. During recovery, as we said, that actually Israel, the law doesn't deal with the stage of recovery at all. It's interesting to see the financial means of coping with recovery. It was mentioned before, sometimes there's countries that actually, for instance, India, that they give compensation to citizens that are that have been affected by a major disaster. Sometimes you have different countries that also talk about different funds, relief funds and rehabilitation funds, but we don't have any of this in Israel. Okay, this is just a list of the different laws that we base this on.
Property tax.
What?
That is for recovery. It's not a law.
But that's, I was asked about the property tax. Property tax just has to do with wartime situations, and it doesn't have to do with natural disasters. This is the problem in Israel. It's masa chush. No, it's not in this law, it's in a separate law. But again, it only has to do with wartime, and also, just wartime. Hostilities.
Emergency.
No, you don't need a declaration of war for this. We don't usually. Israel is in a state of emergency since 1948.
Thank you, Batya, for this introduction.